A law is due to come into force in Russia, banning foreigners from owning more than 20% of any media outlet. Currently, non-Russians can control up to 50%, including TV and radio, so the slash is huge. This means hard times for such outlets as the Moscow Times, Cosmopolitan, National Geographic, Tadler, Forbes, Vogue, GQ, that's just naming a few. Well, just to give you an idea, in Canada, foreign stakes cannot be higher than 33% by law. In the U.S., it's 25%, and a foreigner can't own a share in a TV channel at all. That's why Rupert Murdoch had to change his citizenship. In France and Japan, it's 20% respectively. Well, joining me in the now is British journalist, I should say, Tony Gosling, live tonight. Thanks for being with us. Tell us about Britain. How does London regulate foreign shares in the British media?
Well, in theory, here in Britain, foreigners could own all of our media because we're part of a much bigger trade bloc in the European Union. That's where the rules are set. But there is a specific stipulation here in Britain of a maximum of 20% of any one company. So the idea is to try and keep plurality, that there are plenty of different players in the media scene. But we have to remember, though, that it's not just television we're talking about, or radio, or newspapers. It's also things like books, magazines, and also now the internet as well, which is where we get our news from and our media generally. So the situation is starting to get a little bit wider than it has been in the past. And as the formats change, so the law needs to be there to keep up with it. But our Culture Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, the Conservative Culture Secretary, is trying to impose this 20% as a hard and fast rule, which may affect the BBC, because, of course, the BBC is quite a counterweight to the Tories, even though they've had a Tory chairman quite a lot here in Britain, and that could be a threat to the BBC's presence in Britain, and parts of it may have to be broken up, and that's really an attack on public broadcasting here in Britain.
Obviously, from country to country, it differs. Again, in the United States, in TV and radio, zero foreign shareholders. It's 25%, I believe, in terms of print media. Why do you think that countries impose these kinds of regulations?
Well, I suppose it's because everybody knows that the media is actually quite an important part of democracy, and if it's functioning well. I mean, crooks and criminals and the big financial banksters want to get their hands on the media, don't they, in order to cover up their crimes. For example, they do lie. Remember the weapons of mass destruction, the lies we heard through the press then. But it's also what the media doesn't tell us. It's such a powerful tool nowadays. For example, with the beheading videos that we saw over the last few weeks, very few media outlets of Britain have actually told us that the origin of those is this organisation in Washington DC. The original place they were released wasn't actually in the Middle East at all. So it's what the media don't tell us that's so important. In fact, a few years ago, over in Denmark, one of their, for our Danish listeners, may remember this, viewers, that one of their newsreaders actually ended his bulletin with the words, "And that is what we decided to tell you tonight." And I'm afraid 2 days later he lost his job. But you see, that is actually I think quite an important thing to be telling our readers, is there are things that we're not being told through a media that's getting too close to the people who are financing it.
What do you make of this new move in Russia? Is 20% too much, do you think?
Well, it's a big change, isn't it, from 50% to 20%? And I would suggest that maybe the Russian government should go a little bit more slowly, because the thing is, of course, the foreign influence in the press and the media generally in Russia has actually been pretty positive. You know, a lot of good ideas, a lot of very talented people from other parts of the world have come to Russia from the old Soviet system, which was much more controlled, and opened it up. And so I think 20% is a little bit, you know, maybe somewhere between the 50 and the 20 would have been better. And let's do this bit by bit. But I can totally understand why the Russian government wants to make sure that what's happening here in Britain, with the head of Channel 4 recently here in the UK warning that the Americans are taking over our media, that doesn't happen in Russia.
You could say an Australian who got an American passport. I'm just kidding, talking about Rupert Murdoch, of course. British journalist Tony Gosling with us in the Now Tonight, live from Bristol. Thanks so much.
Anissa, thanks.